button now, and the recording has begun. Without further ado, what I want to do is hand over to Mark Cocker. So Mark Cocker is a multi-award winning author. We're really delighted that he's with us. His book, Our Place, on the Future of Nature in Britain, was described in the Sunday Times as a sobering and magnificent work and a call to some kind of revolution. And I've read it and I think it's great. So I'm going to add my less eloquent description to that. So I fully endorse having a read. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Well, lovely to be here. Fantastic. And it's a really beautiful evening and it's a fantastic subject that we're talking about. I'm going to just talk for about 5 or 10 minutes and then hand over to our two very gifted, really eloquent speakers. That's Mark Thomas of the RSPB's Investigation Department, and then Director of Conservation, Tim Birch, who many of you will perhaps already know. But I was going to I've spent 17 years writing 2 books over my shoulder, as one of them, Birds Britannica and Birds and People. I spent 17 years studying the cultural significance of birds. So I thought I'd just introduce you to the idea, or introduce birds of prey, and point out that while all birds are wonderful, not all birds are equally wonderful. Why are we not meeting, for instance, to talk about the dunnock or the wren? And why is it that birds of prey are a subject that galvanizes like almost no other family of birds? In fact, one could say that birds of prey are the most contested group of animals in Britain today. So they're highly charged, and they're charged with all sorts of feelings, but particularly love, reverence, and fascination. And that's because partly we have a very long history of engaging with birds of prey. Some of our oldest cultural monuments feature birds of prey. If we think about the Assyrian monuments that are in the British Museum from thousands of years BC, they feature extraordinary eagle-headed people. The ancient Egyptians worshipped a god in vulture form. Now, while we might think of vultures as birds of eating dead animals, they saw it as a protective spirit. So if you've ever seen images of Tutankhamun, he had the most beautiful gold lappet-faced vulture on his foreground. So birds of prey were loaded with significance, and that's because they are intrinsically extraordinary. That's because they have remarkable powers of sight, for instance. They can see prey from hundreds and hundreds of meters in the air. They are incredibly powerful. As a fantastic description of a peregrine. A peregrine, probably weighing about 2 or 3 pounds, carrying a black vulture offshore in Scotland, a black grouse, sorry, not a black vulture, a black grouse that probably weighed more than itself. It would be like you flying with a 12 stone kilo, or me carrying a 12 stone cargo. They are incredibly beautiful, but they're also amazingly dynamic. I was very fortunate the other day to be out seeing this extraordinary bearded vulture that Tim is going to introduce shortly. And while I was watching it, not only was it absolutely breathtaking, but there were also 2 peregrines, probably young birds, chasing one another, and they were virtually flying vertically down. And it's those kinds of things, those intrinsic physical, physiological sense powers that birds of prey have, which have triggered this long history of cultural engagement. And so we are predisposed to be interested in them. The ancient Greeks projected their central deity Zeus as an eagle. On the deaths of Roman empires, of the Roman emperor in the imperial period, the Romans would release an eagle from the funeral pyre as a symbol of the emperor's spirit flying off to space. Another of their central deities, Apollo, was represented as a falcon. Now, the other thing about birds of prey is because they're so highly charged, we've also been very envious of them, and actually they have kind of triggered all sorts of responses, including destruction. And the most extraordinary example of that, which we have in Europe, apart from in our own islands, which is part of the subject of today, is the senseless killing of things like honey buzzards by the Italians in the Straits of Messina as the birds migrate north from Africa. Even more heinous for me was that in the 1940s and 50s, American farmers would chase golden eagles in aeroplanes and shoot them in the air. So we have this extraordinary long history of terrible destruction, and out of that terrible legacy came a lot of repentant butchers, as they were known, particularly in America, and some of the founding fathers of conservation in America are those people who wish to atone for this terrible business. Now, sadly, Britain is one of the very few countries that has this long legacy of killing birds of prey. So they are charged in all sorts of ways, and that's why we are here to talk about them today. There are two diverging vectors, if you like, which galvanize our interest. One is the massive increase in numbers of birds of prey. Birds like buzzards have increased by 1,500%, I think it is, in the last 30 years. So many birds of prey are climbing steadily because for 70 years we've realized something that is central to our experience, which is that they are fantastic to see, and we've protected them legally, and those legal measures have led to some birds of prey to increase. Coincidental with that vector is a separate one, which is the ongoing merciless persecution of birds of prey because they conflict with what they see as their narrow self-interest. And this is a great tragedy. It's an ongoing shame upon our nation that we do this. We like to look at the Maltese or the Cypriots and their killing of migrant birds in their millions with glue sticks and other methods for catching migrant birds, blackcaps and robins, etc. And we rightly condemn that unnecessary slaughter of birds, but we have a very similar thing happening in our islands. So we're here today to celebrate those two vectors: the joy, the wonder, the increase in their numbers, and the way in which they give us pleasure. And that's why we have a poll to get you guys to tell us what's your favorite bird of prey. But we've also got two talks tonight, one by Mark, who is, let me just find it, there's a lifelong birder and ringer who has worked for the RSPB for 23 years. Mark Thomas is the head of the RSPB's investigations team, a team that is dedicated to fighting bird crime, is absolutely at the forefront, at the point of intersection of these two vectors, if you like, in the story of birds of prey in our islands. But he's particularly focused on crimes against raptors. And without further ado, I think Mark is going to talk for about 20 minutes, an extremely powerful and compelling talk. So I'll hand over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me to come here and to give this talk. I'm really, really pleased to be doing that. Are my slides now on the screen? Here we go. Excellent stuff. Thank you. I'm very, very fortunate to manage a team of about 15 staff who investigate wild bird crime for the RSPB. It's a national team, and we have 3 to 4 members of staff in the north. So many of the crimes that you hear about in places like the Peak District, my team will have been involved in with the police, with the CPS and with other partners. So this talk, I'm going to take you on a journey. Some of the slides, starting with the very first one, I'm afraid, show the reality that we face in this team. But as Mark Cocker said, birds of prey are doing well. Generally speaking, you've got more chance of seeing birds of prey these days than you had in the past. They're doing well, and it's really noticeable where birds of prey are not doing well, and that's where my focus of my talk will be. So next slide, please. Birds of prey are trapped, such as this peregrine. This was in a quarry in Staffordshire, and we believe this was linked to pigeon fanciers who set this trap on the nest ledge for this bird. This is the male. This bird had to be euthanized, and we rescued the chicks, and the chicks went into a foster home. But that's the reality. The quarry company there are really conservation minded. They gave us a telephone call, and we got on the scene very, very quickly. Next slide, please. Birds of prey are poisoned. So this is a recently poisoned buzzard. You can see how recent. The bird actually still looks alive, but you can see the piece of meat in the bird's beak, and you can see the bait, which is the remains of a pheasant. And this had a poisonous substance put on it. This was a case in the south, and this was found by a 5-year-old child and his family walking in a meadow on a pheasant shoot. Had that child ingested any of that poison, we'd be dealing with something much more serious than the dead buzzard. Next slide, please. All birds of prey can be shot. This is a case in Cumbria where these two were actually trapped in a cage trap on an estate. It was a small pheasant shoot, and we managed to film a gamekeeper batter these birds to death, unfortunately, and that's the reality. It's the police on the left and one of my colleagues from the past, Bob Elliott. Next slide, please. So where are these things taking place? Well, RSPB holds a database where all the records and all the confirmed incidents are logged centrally. And what we've done is we've made this publicly available, or a part of that publicly available. So you can go to the Raptor Persecution Map Hub. And when you log in there, you can zoom right down to the location where you live, and you can see what crimes have been taking place in your 10 kilometre square. You can compare that with England, Scotland. You can look over a particular range span. So this is a really powerful tool, and it enables us every year to publish a report called Bird Crime. And that focuses on all the incidents that have happened in the previous year. And we're currently working on the next edition, which will be out shortly. So bird crime is nothing new. This has been ongoing for generations, and all we do is collect that information and then with our investigators help the police to investigate these incidents. Next slide, please. So who is committing these offences? And this is very important. If you're working with the police and you're trying to detect criminality, you need to know who you're facing and what group of people you're facing, and then actually the capabilities of those groups of people. What technology do they use? Where do they live? Where are the crimes committed? So these are the occupations of the individuals that have been prosecuted. So these are proven cases at court during the time window 1990 to 2018. And as you can see from this, 67.2% of those that occupied the occupation of them are gamekeepers. So that is who we are dealing with in the large part. Next slide, please. So where do these things happen? Well, here's a map showing raptor persecution between 2009 and 2018. These are confirmed bird of prey incidents for England. And you can see the different colours in the maps for the 10 kilometre squares show the hot spots, if you like, where these incidents occurs. Several things to take from this. This is widespread. So this is right across the country. There are lots of squares there. So persecution is quite rife. In the lowlands, it will be lowland shoots, pheasants and partridge shoots. In the uplands, it will be grouse. And when we look at the Peak District National Park, one of only 3 or 4 or 5 squares on that grid, 2 of those are within the boundary of the national park. We have a problem here. We have a black hole in the Peak District National Park. Next slide, please. So the Peak is a wonderful place, or is it? When you drive through it, is it wilderness? Is it managed? Do you see these things? Do you not see these things? Should you see these things? Should it look different? These are all the questions. And I'm a young lad who first saw goshawks in the Peak District, living in Sheffield, absolutely amazed by these birds and thought everything was fine. And then professionally now I go back to the Peak and I'm in dismay. I mean, it really emotionally gets me going in the Northern Dark Peak and knowing what is actually going on there. So for the birders in here, the left-hand picture as I see it is an adult female goshawk. So you can see the bars on the chest go around the chest. The one on the right-hand side is an immature, and you can see the streaks come downwards. So that's just a little snippet for birders. Next slide, please. So where should goshawks be? Well, this is the Derwent Reservoir, the Upper Derwent Valley. This has been a stronghold for birds of prey, for goshawks for a while. But there has been issues up here, and most noticeably in the last 20 years, there's been a number of investigations and prosecutions. So I'm just going to whistle stop through those just to give you an idea. We've worked with a lot of partners up here, so be it the police, be it the conservation bodies, National Trust, forestry, all these people on the ground trying to change the fortunes of birds of prey. However, there's still big issues to address. Next slide, please. So the first case I want to go back to is 2005, that this is finally concluded, but the investigation began in 2002, and it was basically a gamekeeper who had been in the Upper Derwent Valley for many years, sat on many of the conservation forums and committees, and he was caught pretty much red-handed by the raptor group at a goshawk nest, And a few days later, that goshawk nest was illegally destroyed. The eggs and the contents were destroyed. And a search warrant took place at his house. A pair of tree climbing spikes were found there. And forensically, those spikes were matched to the marks that were made on the tree by the person who climbed the tree to destroy the nest. So this was a successful prosecution. And for the first time, we had an idea of who or what user group were causing crimes against birds of prey in that particular location. Next slide, please. Just around about the same time as that, we had the foot and mouth disease in 2001. And large parts of the countryside were out of bounds. And the raptor groups, who do a fantastic job monitoring birds of prey, could not get to monitor birds like goshawks and peregrines in the Peak District. And when they were finally allowed back out there in 2002, 2003, they noticed a big issue. Many of the territories of birds had gone. And we, RSPB, published this report, Peak Malpractice, and it was what is happening to wildlife in the national park. And essentially that is what the whole report was about. And we also looked at badgers. We teamed up with the South Yorkshire Badger Group, and at the same time that birds of prey were vanishing, so were badgers. Something was going on here to two predator groups. Next slide, please. And when we drill down into the detail, this shows the Peak District's a little bit abstract, but the red dots are goshawk territories. So this is where there's been an adult pair of goshawks with a nest, and they've bred successfully for a number of years. You can see pre-2000, quite a number of goshawks. The black dots are peregrines. And then when we go to the next one, 2001 to 2005, at the bottom right, you can see we've only got one goshawk territory left. So something really significant happened to goshawks and peregrines after 2000. And this tied in with the report that we published. Now, those birds have not returned. We have not got those goshawks back in that area. We've got them in the Derwent Valley, which is the reservoir slightly to the west, but they are not breeding on private grouse moors in that northeast peak moors, as we called it. We don't know what happened to these nests exactly. We don't know who was responsible, but these adult birds vanished. Next slide, please. So RSPB have got lots of fieldwork staff, and we employed a person to spend as much time as possible in the Derwent Valley to trying to detect what was going on, because it's obvious people can't commit these crimes and be invisible. You start watching the patterns of people and they will tell you what is going on. And this trap was found. This is a crow cage trap, so it's a lawful trap if used to catch crows, and they are humanely destroyed. It's the kind of predator control trap that would be used with grouse estates and things like this. And just to the right of this image is a driven grouse moor just off the screen, and this was on a very steep slope, well out of the way. People would not find this location. So when this trap was found, next slide please, inside it on the left-hand side, you can see a white pigeon, lots of pigeon feathers on the ground, which don't belong to this bird. And next slide, please. And there's a close-up of the pigeon. Now, the way this trap works, it's like a lobster pot. Predators go in through a hole in the roof, and once they're inside, they can't get back out. So once this trap was found, RSPB installed a covert camera and watched what happened. And we had the local gamekeeper visit the trap the very next day, checking on the pigeon and basically feeding the pigeon, keeping the pigeon alive. And nearby, we found the remains of a dead sparrowhawk that had definitely been in that trap. Basically, this was a hawk trap. That pigeon is Christmas dinner to a goshawk, and that is being used illegally to pull the birds in to presumably kill the birds. Next slide, please. So the evidence was gathered. We went to Derbyshire Police, and the search warrant took place. Now, this is on National Trust land, but it's a tenanted shoot, and the gamekeeper responsible for this trap was a tenant gamekeeper belonging to the tenancy. So a search took place, and next slide, please. And amongst the items found were camouflage clothing. You can see a plastic peregrine decoy, and we know subsequent to this, these are now being used to pulling birds of prey to illegally shoot. So that was very significant. But the key exhibit was found within this shed, and that was the same pigeon that was in the trap. Well, how do we know it was the same pigeon? Because we went into the trap and we marked the wings of that pigeon. And later, towards the weekend, the gamekeeper came along and released the pigeon, knowing that people were going to be around at the weekend. And that pigeon, being a homing pigeon, flew 3 kilometers down the valley and back into this shed. So when we turned up with the police, we went into the shed, checked all the pigeon's wings, and found the same pigeon that had been in the trap. So what happened next? Next slide, please. This is Professor Ian Newton with a police officer on the left, and he's examining the body of the sparrowhawk You know, the lengths that you have to go to with these cases is incredible. Amazing amount of work from the police and the CPS and other partners here. About a year's worth of investigation. Next slide, please. And then the outcome was we had a 10-day trial. So this was an incredibly tense and difficult trial. There was expert witnesses on both sides. The defense case was that the gamekeeper wasn't operating the trap. He didn't see the pigeon when we filmed him coming to check it. And the person who we did film was a 17-year-old gamekeeper on a placement. There was also allegations that the RSPB set the entire thing up. But the end result was the gamekeeper was found guilty on all charges and he had to pay £10,000 costs. Now, you can kind of think that's brilliant, but what then happened was an appeal. So we went through the whole process again, another trial, a complete retrial, and we got the same result. And the increase in cost was £17,000. So a really significant piece of casework. And again, we've now got a second gamekeeper in that valley found guilty in a court of law for offences against birds of prey. This is what had been going on in that location. Next slide, please. So has things got better? No. So here we are in 2015. We're writing about an incident. We had a covert camera on a goshawk nest. We knew nests were still being destroyed and we couldn't work out exactly why. Our cameras were not catching people. And this was kind of a really good moment. We had a camera in, and overnight, on one night, a group of men arrived at this goshawk nest in the middle of the night, shone torches onto the nest, and then blasted the nest with several shots from different guns aimed at the nest. So we knew that people were taking these nests out at night. Now, who would be able to do that? Who would be able to find the location, have access at night, have firearms? Well, you know, that's not that difficult really to answer. Next slide, please. So this is also an incident. I mean, we've got a multitude of incidents since this. You know, I could tell you about each one. I'd be here for a very long time. This buzzard was found near Windscar Reservoir, slightly further north in the Derwent Valley. And this bird has almost definitely been in a pole trap. Pole traps have been outlawed for over 100 years. And you can see this bird is just horrific, the injuries to the bird's leg from the trap. The person who found this walked for 1 hour back to their car, sat it or laid it on a seat, drove to a vet, and the bird had to be euthanized. So this is horrible. This is really nasty stuff. Next slide, please. So what's the current situation? This was a paper I authored last year with Tim Melling and Mick Price from the Raptor Group, one of my conservation colleagues. And we looked at raptors, particularly peregrines and goshawks, in the peak. It was published in British Birds, the journal British Birds. Next slide, please. And what it basically shows here, if you look at the left-hand side first, the goshawk. So the solid line is the goshawk population in the dark peak. The dark peak is where there are heather, there is gritstone, and there are grouse, so there's grouse moors. The dotted line is where you have dales and quarries, and it's in the white peak. There's no grouse moors in the white peak as such. And you can see the population of goshawk in the dark peak has massively decreased. Population in the white peak has increased. And when you look at that with peregrine, you've got the exact same impact with peregrines. And this is taking data from every single nest that we monitored and could found during that time window. So there's a huge amount of data in this report. Next slide, please. And this map shows goshawk territories. So you can see the pink squares in the background. They are land use squares. So they show you from aerial pictures where burning has taken place, i.e. where grouse moors are. And those, the left-hand slide, you can see in red are failed nests, black successful nests, and they're goshawks. So all the goshawk populations at the beginning of the study in 1995 were in the dark peak and they were on grouse moors. And you know, 50% success, let's say, in a typical year. And then the image on the right-hand side shows the end of the study, 2015. There's very few nests on the grouse moors left at all because of persecution. And the population, particularly around places like Chatsworth, which is a very enlightened estate, in the South Peak, in the White Peak, are doing really well. So here you have a situation where you could drive on a road through, say, Bamford, and 20 miles to the south of you, it's bustling with birds of prey. It's fantastic. There's buzzards everywhere. As Mark explained before, you know, it's good. It feels good. You can see things. You drive north over that line, you hit the gritstone and the heather and the grouse, and there are no birds of prey. and the birds of prey that are there are moving through. They're not breeding. The ones that try and breed, the success levels are really poor, particularly on private estates. Next slide, please. This is the same for peregrine. I shan't dwell on this, but essentially peregrines were in the dark peak where the grouse moors are, lowish productivity at the beginning of the study. The end of the study, many more peregrines in the south of the peak in quarries, and the pairs that were in the dark peak are simply gone. They don't breed there anymore. And the two pairs that do regularly breed are on National Trust and RSPB land, which speaks volumes. Next slide, please. The really interesting feature in this study was this one. So when you look at the checkered background to the green, that shows where the grouse moors are, and then each 10-kilometre square we've looked at confirmed incidents. These are incidents where we've got a dead body, it's been analysed, it's been shot, or it's been poisoned. And you can see the top square with 24 confirmed persecution incidents. That's one of the worst squares in the whole of England for raptor persecution. There's 9 different grouse moors there. You come to the south of the peak where there's no grouse moors and look at the levels, 0 crimes in most of those squares. So it's compelling, it's statistically proven, this link. It's beyond, reasoning anyway. This is absolutely what is happening. Next slide, please. So a scene like this, go to the white peak, you're going to see it. You go to the dark peak, it's going to be very rare to see it. And as I said, it's going to be on National Trust or RSPB land. Next slide, please. Hen Harriers. Well, they're a very rare bird. There could be 30 pairs in the Peak District if they were left alone. Next slide, please. So this is a really significant incident, again on National Trust land. And I must say the National Trust have been really good. And this was an incident where a person saw a hen harrier sat on a post and then realized it wasn't moving. So this is the white object at the bottom in the square. And then suddenly saw a man move slightly to the left. You can kind of see a pixelated shape there. And the man was laid in the heather with a gun. One of the National Trust grouse moors. And as a result of this, the police were involved, the National Trust were involved, and the tenant who leased out that shoot didn't remain on that tenancy for much longer. Whether the two incidents were connected, that's up to the National Trust. I don't really know for certain, but a new tenant came in, and that new tenant has changed things around. And that is the only estate now, ironically, in the Peak District where hen harriers have bred in recent years. So it does show with enlightened management of the ground and, increased threats to people who may be thinking of taking the law into their own hands, you can create space for hen harriers. But there should be far more than just this one pair every now and again. We could have 30 pairs in the Peak District, and it's a travesty that we haven't. Next slide, please. RSPB have been involved in satellite tagging hen harriers. This is a bird called Octavia. This is a young bird born in the Peak District and satellite tagged. Whilst it remained in the nest area, the bird was safe. However, next slide, please. The bird then moved, and within a day or two of leaving the nest and moving into an area again on the northeast peak moors. So this is the area where we've lost the goshawks and we've lost the badgers. Octavia vanished. Her last transmission gave us a fix on the driven grouse moor near Broom Head. We don't know what happened to that bird, but it's highly significant that that bird vanished on a driven grouse moor. You'll have seen all the recent documentation, the Natural England study, there's a huge percentage of tagged hen harriers that vanish on driven grouse moors. And, these birds are being illegally killed. It's very clear what is going on from that data. Next slide, please. So what have some of the bodies been doing? Well, the National Park were tasked to set up a bird of prey initiative, and that had the pro-conservation bodies and it had the shooting organizations trying to work together. They set some very high targets to try and get these numbers back. So it was only to get the numbers back to a baseline where they were prior to the foot and mouth. RSPB was part of that, but basically every single year that initiative failed. It could not manage the people on the ground in order to bring birds of prey back. And after a period of time, a considerable period of time, RSPB have pulled out of that initiative. It's a waste of our energy. It's a waste of our commitment to do that. We can do that elsewhere and we can achieve different kinds of results. The initiative still continues, and again, it's failed to reach its targets. So much so that they're probably setting baselines that are based on recent baselines, not the baselines of birds of prey that were there that should be returning to the national park. In terms of national park, it's a no-go zone in the north for birds of prey. Next slide, please. So where are we? Just to bring you up to speed, right up to the current time. This is an horrific picture. I'm sorry for that. So 2020, we've had lockdown. Nobody should be out there killing things. The RSPB has had a surge of crimes against birds of prey in the north and the south. In the north, to do with grouse moors. In the south, to do with pheasants and partridge shoots. 81% of the incidents we've had reported that have been confirmed have been in connection with shooting, as I said, in the north and the south. So far within the Peak District, we've had a shot buzzard, a shot shorted owl discovered, a dead peregrine awaiting toxicology, another peregrine awaiting toxicology, a dead buzzard awaiting toxicology, a dead sparrowhawk awaiting, 3 peregrine nest robberies, a raven nest failure where the chicks were on the verge of fledging and the parents vanished. And then just outside the park to the south, 2 shot buzzards, a poison kestrel and a poison buzzard. So that's just within 3 or 4 months in one national park. And how much of that stuff are we missing? We're missing a huge amount. This is the tip of the iceberg for these types of incidents. So there is a huge amount of work to be done here. So even if you claim some kind of success because birds of prey might be breeding again, well, this is what is then happening to them, you know. So there's nothing to celebrate here at all. Like I said, you go outside the park, you drive back towards Sheffield, and as soon as you leave the grouse moors, you start seeing buzzards. You know, the irony of this is incredible. Final slide, I think. Thank you. Next slide. So what can we do? Well, the only thing that's going to change this is everybody on this call. It's the public. It's standing together. So this was the first Hen Harrier Day in the Peak. This talk is part of Hen Harrier Day. It's going to be broadcast as part of Hen Harrier Day. And it's just a massive plea. If you see things, please be vigilant. Report them to the RSPB. Report them to the police. And we can do this. We can work together to solve this issue. And that's probably all I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Very, very powerful. I mean, I've seen it now twice, but it's more shocking and more dramatic and more compelling, really, the second time I see it. Well, we'll have a chance to talk about, Ben, have we set up the questions for people to say what their favourite bird of prey is, the 2 questions we set them?
Yes, we have, and I feel like that might be a chance to lift the mood a bit after a very serious and important, but also, you know, quite a challenging presentation. So let's have a go at that, shall we? Our poll question was, what's your favourite bird of prey? So you should see have an opportunity to vote on that there. We can only put 10 into the poll, so we had a bit of a debate over which to include. So if your favourite bird of prey is not there, please drop it into the chat instead.
We can't vote.
I've just realised that.
Pressurise us for Montague's Harrier. My favourite is on there, though. Is yours, Tim?
It is, yeah.
So it's just at the bottom, the Bearded Vulture.
So somebody's just asked how you find the poll. It should be up on your screen now. If it's not popped up, just have a look through some of the other windows. If you've got a few windows open, maybe it's hidden behind something. So I think we've got, people, yeah, clearly a few people have just found it because suddenly the number of people voting has shot up.
Fantastic.
Well, it's interesting. We don't have a clear winner here, and just a few more people voting, and then I'll share the results. I'm going to shut it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. Let's end it there. And here is our result. So it's even Stevens between kestrel and peregrine.
That's interesting, isn't it? It's falcons are, I mean, they're all amazing, let's face it. But yeah. Kestrels, you know, we see them regularly. They're such wonderful birds. And of course, they inspired Gerard Manley Hopkins to one of the great poems about birds of prey, The Windhover.
And we've got people saying red kite. Yes, no, that's one of the ones we don't have on there. So sorry, we were limited to 10. But we will have 2 votes for red kite from the chat. And an
my favourite only got 2%, but I love I think merlins are incredible. I mean, they're the smallest by size.
So we've got, we do have another question I think we could ask now as well. And I think this would be interesting off the back of, you know, of what both Marks have been saying in terms of there being, you know, well, what they've been seeing. And that is whether you've seen more or fewer birds of prey recently. So when you think about, you know, what you're seeing now versus perhaps what you were seeing a few years ago, or what do you think you're seeing?
It's It's an interesting question, because I never saw, I lived in Derbyshire from 72 to 79 when I was a keen birder. I never once saw a buzzard in Derbyshire. And then I think I saw my first one in Derbyshire in about 1990, my first Norfolk one, not till 1994. I first had them breeding in 2002, and now, of course, they are absolutely in every parish. So it's been a fantastic success story. And of course, it brings us such joy. You know, the thing is that it's common birds often, as we saw there, a quarter of people voted for kestrel. Kestrels have actually declined very dramatically, but they bring us enormous pleasure, and that's what this subject is about. And I think that although Mark's talk, you said, was dark, well, it is dark, but truthfully, it's only the truth which will allow us to put things into true perspective and empower us. I think that's the other key thing that a talk like that does. It lets us see where we are and what should be done, etc. So although Ben rightly said it's tough looking at these birds of prey with injuries and wounds and hearing of these rather dark behaviours, it's still very powerful to see it, and that was fantastic. Well, perhaps a slightly brighter note, Ben. Oh, you need to do our, what, have people see more or less?
We've got to, you should have the results up on screen now, I mean, more, absolutely. Most people have seen more, and that's very heartening and reflects what everybody's been saying so far. But of course, we should be seeing much more, and also certainly in more places too.
Mm. Well, our next speaker is Director of Nature's Recovery in the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. That's Tim Birch. He's had a very long career in nature conservation and environmental campaigning all over the world, working for many different organisations. He grew up in Stockport, so he's a local lad in the west of the Peak District, so he knows the uplands of the Dark Peak extremely well. He's very vocal on birds of prey persecution for the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and he is cheerleader in chief for this fantastic bird that's in our midst at the moment, the bearded vulture. So without further ado, Tim, tell us a little bit more about the bearded vulture, and also what kind of future could we have for birds of prey?
Great, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Mark Thomas from the RSPB. Amazing work you're doing, Mark, with your team. I salute you. It's so important. Carry on, and I think we will win in the end. I'm convinced about that, and I'll begin to explain why we will win and why people will see more birds in our national park. And I think it's just worth reflecting that we are having this discussion about a national park. And I continually have to kind of scratch my head and remind myself, we are talking about what should be some of the most protected areas in the UK, where we should see the most abundant wildlife and the most spectacular landscapes, and yet that isn't the case. And at times I do ask the question, really, what are national parks for if we can't ensure that some of our most iconic birds are protected? And I'll explain a bit more about that. And I'll also explain a bit about the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust view about the future for our uplands, and indeed the Wildlife Trust overall view about a wilder future. But let me just first talk a little bit about our wonderful friend, the bearded vulture, who miraculously turned up, we think, from the Alps, although it could be the Pyrenees, we're not quite sure. The only way we could really find out is if we got hold of a feather from the bird, or if the bird actually had to be recovered if it became injured or sick, and then we could do DNA analysis. I'm in close contact with the Vulture Conservation Foundation in Europe, who are the premier organization looking to recover and restore vultures across the whole of Europe. It is quite amazing, this bird has turned up. It was in Belgium and France in the early part of the summer, and then miraculously turned up in the Peak District. When I first got the call about the bearded vulture arriving, I did have to sort of like almost have a double take and think, you know, was I hearing things? Was I misreading things? And when somebody suggested that it was a lammergeier here, which I have to say isn't the right phrase. We always have to call it bearded vulture because lammergeier is a German derivative of the name lamb killer. These birds do not kill lambs, and that was a key reason why they were heavily targeted in Europe, because the view from land managers and farmers was that they did target sheep and they did target lambs, but that isn't the case. So when it turned up, obviously it was too good an opportunity to miss to actually go and have a look at the bearded vulture. And I think one of the things that I think has been as impressive about this bird being in the Peak District is also the response of hundreds and hundreds of people to actually wanting to get out to see this bird. I mean, I've never seen anything quite like it. Literally on the road above Lady Bower, people with kids and families in deck chairs, trying to borrow binoculars, trying to scan the skyline, trying to catch a glimpse of this absolutely magnificent bird. And I think what this shows is, as Mark was explaining, this deep cultural connection, this deep connection we have with these amazing birds. And I think that really points to the future, and it points to an optimistic future where we need national parks and we need our environments to be in a position where we can connect with more amazing wildlife like bearded vultures. Now, I'm not suggesting that the bearded vulture is going to stick around. It's wandering. It's like an adolescent. It kind of goes off for a while, and then it'll return to its breeding grounds, hopefully. But it's got quite a perilous journey back to the Alps, we think, or the Pyrenees. But there's no question that actually having the bearded vulture in the Peak District has literally attracted lots and lots of people to see this wonderful bird. Next slide, please, Ben. And I was fortunate to also find it at the roost site. It was roosting in the Dark Peak very early on. Again, it was quite staggering to see this. And the next slide, please. And I think what is interesting as well, as I said, is the numbers of bird watchers and photographers, but also members of the general public who wanted to see this amazing bird. And I have to say that actually, on the whole, 99% of all the bird watchers and photographers have been doing an amazing job respecting this bird. There's always the odd one or two who want to get that bit closer, but on the whole, I have been so impressed by people respecting that bird, people who've almost been self-policing these remote sites and telling people to get too close to come back and give the bird the space. So the bird was very, very happy at that site, just north of the Lady Bower Reservoir. And it has been there periodically. It's now moved further north. It's in the Crowden area in the northern part of the Peak District, but it's still around. And I have asked friends in the Vulture Conservation Foundation, how long will it stick around for? Well, if it's finding food, and it's mainly feeding on dead sheep carcasses, it literally eats bones. 80% of its diet is eating bones. The most incredible physiology, they literally dissolve bones in their stomachs, a pH of 1. And bearded vultures will preferentially, if offered meat or bones, they will preferentially choose bones. So a quite incredible bird with an incredible biology. It could stick around for a lot longer, but one of the problems and one of the concerns we have is it has been occupying areas of the Dark Peak where we know there has been a serious problem over the years of ongoing illegal bird of prey persecution. And I have been talking to the Vulture Conservation Foundation about this, and we have been talking to the National Trust. My CEO, Joe Smith, has been in conversation with the CEO of the Peak District National Park, Sarah Fowler, about this, because one of the key issues we have, apart from it being illegally persecuted, my own view is it would be absolute madness for anybody in the shooting community to take a shot at this bird, because it is such a high-profile bird in the media, nationally and internationally. The Vulture Conservation Foundation are monitoring this bird from overseas. They know what's happening over here. And also they are fully aware of the threat this bird faces from being and living and settling in and around grouse moors. Just next slide, please, Ben. And one of the issues that we do have in and around grouse moors is to do with, unfortunately, and I have to apologize for the next slides are coming up, but I think it is important people do see this, is what we call stink pits. So these are areas where gamekeepers will actually shoot wildlife like foxes, like crows, rabbits, mountain hares. I've even seen, sadly, beautiful white mountain hares in stink pits. These are areas where animals will be shot and actually dumped on the moors. Next slide, please. And often in large buckets. This is a bucket full of crows, dead crows. And the idea is that this will then attract predators in. And these areas are often heavily snared, and then more animals are caught, particularly foxes, but there have been cases of badgers caught in these snares as well, which is really, really unfortunate. And then those animals are then shot. Badgers, we have had evidence where badgers have been caught and snared, and gamekeepers have tried to release those snares from those badgers, which obviously they need to do by law. But the problem we have is that with these stink pits, if those birds have been shot using lead shot, And if the bearded vulture actually, which is attracted to carrion, the bearded vulture actually was to feed on carrion that's full of lead shot, then there was a serious risk of that bird dying. Lead poisoning is a key factor in terms of vulture mortality in Europe. And speaking to the head of the Vulture Conservation Foundation, he and I have both been very concerned about this. So we have put out a call, and it was in the media last week, calling on grouse moor estate owners in the areas where we know our bearded vulture is currently settled to remove all stink pits. In my own view, stink pits have no place in a national park. It's not what national parks should be about. I'm astonished it's still allowed. The National Trust do not allow stink pits, however, they're not illegal. But I think it's important that the public do realize what is going on. Unfortunately, people who walk in these areas have come across these stink pits. I have to say they are highly distressing, and it's disturbing to find them. Next slide, please. And around these stink pits, you will often find snares. So again, these are legal. Whether or not they should be allowed in a national park is a whole other question. But the other issue we have for the vulture is that actually it could not only get itself poisoned by eating from a stink pit, but it could also get itself trapped in snares around the stink pit. And there are lots of snares in many areas around the grouse moors. And one of the problems that we face as a wildlife trust is that we have a number of wildlife trust reserves in these areas. Lady Bower Woods, for example, Sheffield Wildlife Trust as well have nature reserves that actually adjoin grouse moors in the Peak District. And the problem we have is that often we have snares and traps set by the grouse moor owners around the edge of our nature reserve. So it's literally like a ring of steel around our nature reserves. This is a complete opposite of where we need to go in terms of nature recovery. We should not have to have these isolated nature reserves where foxes, weasels, or stoats that emerge, or even badgers, out of our nature reserve run the risk of getting caught or shot. And I think that is a very disturbing situation we have in a minute. And that can only be resolved, as I'll explain a bit more, I think, by increasing public awareness and public pressure, because my own view and the Wildlife Trust point of view is this is not what national parks should be about in the uplands. We should allow wildlife to wander freely. People should have the opportunity to see amazing wildlife. And yet in many areas, we still have significant problems, such as these that I'm pointing out. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to just briefly touch on, just for the remaining few minutes of my talk, is really what does all this signify and why are we in this position? And we're in this position because of the way our uplands in many areas are currently used. This is a shot looking over Strines, which is extensive areas of heather moorland. It's effectively a heather monoculture, extremely poor for biodiversity. And the question is really, do we want to continue with our uplands looking like this, or can we think of a different way that our uplands can be managed that can provide more effective resilience against a climate crisis, can actually increase our biodiversity, can increase nature tourism opportunities? Seeing how many people just responded to the bearded vulture. I mean, it was so heartening to kind of speak and talk to people who were desperate. Mark, I know you're one of them, to see the bearded vulture. I'm glad you saw it eventually. The next slide, please. So this is in Strines above the Lady Bower Reservoir. This is an interesting photo that I took quite recently, actually, in mid-Wales. And I've used this extensively in talks I've given. Above Machynlleth in mid-Wales, is a remarkable and stunning valley. And if you drive down that valley, there's a fence that goes all the way up from top to bottom. And that fence has literally kept sheep out of one part of the hillside and allowed natural regeneration in the other part of the hillside. Next slide, please. And what's incredible to that regenerating part of the hillside, and this could also be a situation we could have in the Peak District, is as it's been allowed to regenerate and as it's got wilder, you've got this amazing, it reminds me actually of places I've seen in British Columbia in Canada, this wonderful habitat of heather, scrub, and birch and rowan, trees moving up that hillside. I could quite easily see and imagine I'm somewhere in a remote part of Europe. I could see lynx moving through that hillside. I could see wildcat moving through that hillside. It was this side of the fence, I heard peregrine and I heard raven. It just gives us a bit of a glimpse of the way our uplands could be. And I think that's the exciting, wilder future that I think we should be looking at. We should be looking at our uplands teeming with wildlife, really helping to deal with the climate crisis by locking up carbon, helping to deal with the biodiversity crisis by increasing wildlife. There's no question the Peak District has the potential to be an amazing place to see more wildlife. There's no question about that. But we need to deal with the current way that land is managed. We need to deal with the ongoing illegal bird of prey persecution. And if we deal with that, then I think that there is a brighter future ahead. And I think the only way we're going to deal with this is actually through increasing public pressure and public awareness. As we get more and more people aware of actually the wildlife they're missing in their national park, people are becoming more annoyed and more angry, more vocal. So I would urge everybody to write a letter to your MP, write to the CEO of the Peak District National Park, let them know about your concerns and why is it in our national park we are all being deprived of the kind of amazing wildlife we should all be expecting to see. It's our national heritage. We have a right to have this wildlife back in these amazing landscapes. And I think there's no question that actually public pressure will help to change this. The final slide, please. The final thing I wanted to talk about was just very briefly, we spoke about peregrines, and we have had a problem this year in the White Peak where we had a peregrine nest raided in one of our nature reserves at Hartington Meadows, which some of you may know. That's being currently investigated by the police, and we think that was raided for the Middle Eastern market. Mark and I have been in close contact about this in the RSPB. And that is obviously a sad state of affairs as well. For some reason, wild UK peregrines are highly sought after in the Middle East, and peregrines will actually fetch a large price, thousands of pounds in the Middle East for falconry. We are actively looking at that in a minute with the police, with the RSPB, and how we are going to ensure next year that doesn't happen. So I can guarantee we will have a stronger response next year, not only to protect those peregrines at our nest site in Hartington, but other nest sites that were also robbed as well in the White Peak. So I think that's probably where I'm going to end it. Hopefully it's been a bit of the way forward, the future, and also pointing out as well some of the grim realities. I'm sorry for some of the shocking photos, but I think it's important to people do realize what's going on. But I'm convinced that we do have a brighter future working together and with increasing public awareness.
Well, thank you, Tim. That was fantastic. And yes, I completely endorse your vision of a wilder Britain and a wilder Peak District. And it seems such a shame that the two current measures of our conservation policies in national parks, the one measure we use and on which they were founded is beauty. And of course, beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. I remember meeting a farmer who spent $500,000 on chemicals on his prairie of GM corn. And I said, do you think this is beautiful? And he said, it is beautiful. And of course, when you use a measure such as beauty instead of biodiversity as a yardstick for the quality and condition of your national parks, you end up with the places that we've got. It's really outdated, outmoded, and you know, we need a new way of seeing our national parks. They are, after all, the repository of our finest landscapes. Wouldn't it be great if they were upgraded in terms of their environment? So your talk was maybe sobering, but again, you know, it's the fact that the truth or this understanding of what's happening underneath the landscape we see as we drive past is very, very important. So thank you for that. Ben, do we go straight to our Q&A now?
Yes, I think so. So for what we're going to do now, we're going to open up the floor to questions. So what you'll see on your screen, if you found the little toolbar along the bottom, is a box that says Q&A. I can see some of you have already found it. So if you put your question in there, and then we'll try and bring in as many of you as possible to ask your question of the panel. And when we bring you in, what will happen is you'll be unmuted and you'll have the opportunity to speak. If it doesn't work initially, don't press any buttons. I'll try and unmute you if there's a technical problem. Okay, so let's see how that works. And I'm not going to be able to manage to answer all the questions, which means I'm not going to do them in the order necessary that they've come in. So just put your question in, even if you're the last. It might still be the case that we bring you in. So keep typing. What I'm going to do, it'll always takes just a moment to bring in the first person.
Ben, do we need to nominate who they want to ask, or do they just ask the panelists in general?
Yeah, so the person coming in, if you want to direct your question to someone in particular, then that's fine. But also, you know, any of you can answer the question as well. So the first person we're going to go to is Mike Gillett. So Mike, if you're there and we've managed to get the tech working, perhaps you could ask your question now.
Hi there, thank you. So I was just wondering whether there's effective enough coordination between different NGOs, such as wildlife trusts and the RSPB, in terms of galvanising the public to take actions. And I'm thinking of specifically a petition that was launched a couple of years ago by Sheffield Wildlife Trust to ban stink pits in England. And unfortunately, I only got 4,400 signatures, which to me is, it's really poor. And that, I think if there was a more coordinated way of sharing petitions, I think you'd get a lot bigger response to these kind of things. I mean, maybe there needs to be a Twitter group or a Facebook group, which is just for sharing petitions that people could sign up to, and then there's like a central repository. And someone...
Oh. Sorry, I've accidentally turned mic off. Hang on a second, Mike. Not deliberate. Hang on. Don't press anything. I'm trying to unmute you again.
I think we got Mike's question though.
I think you have got Mike's question there though. So Mike, I'm trying to unmute you, Mike, but in the meantime, perhaps I think probably that might be, in the first instance, perhaps a question for Tim about whether we need to coordinate ourselves more nationally to help cross-promote campaigns, and then Mark, if you wanted to come in on that afterwards. And
yeah, look, I think that is a good question, and I think we can be better in terms of the way we do work together. There's no question about that. I mean, I did sign the petition. I did sign the stink pit petition those few years ago, and we do, Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, we do work very closely, for example, with our colleagues in the RSPB. But I think in order to get more public awareness and public pressure, then I think that does require more campaigning. And the thing I have to say is I'm optimistic about this, because the fact we now have a new CEO of the Wildlife Trust, Craig Bennett, who has come from Friends of the Earth and has more of a campaign background, I think you will see Wildlife Trust be more vocal on more of these kinds of issues. And I think it's really important that we do. Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, I'd say, has been one of the more vocal wildlife trusts from a campaign point of view over the last couple of years. And we're going to continue to do that, because we need to speak out more strongly for wildlife, but we need to do that with more people working together. And I totally agree with the point you raise, and we will endeavour to work more closely than ever with other organisations and you and other members of the public to get to where we want to get to.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Mike. Mark, do you have anything you want to add to that question?
Well, I mean, the central tenet of my book, Our Place, was that it would be great to see a coordinated vision, not just of conservation. I mean, there are several books coming forth, one by Lawrence Rose called Framing Conservation, which is about the failure of the existing model that we have created in the 1940s. And what I think is necessary is a collective vision of what Britain could be like if wildlife were really placed at the heart of our affairs. Just to give you one example of the centrality of nature to the British people, is that the entire sheep industry in the UK is worth less to our economy than the tourist industry in Derbyshire and the Peak District. Now, that's not to suggest that we don't need sheep farming, but it is to point out that we have massive subsidies for farmers, which will change with the new agricultural bill and the new conservation bill. But at the same time, we have invested very heavily in very poorly performing industries that have had devastating effects on our landscape. And I would love to see a coordinated vision by a collective group of environmentalists across the spectrum that offered us a vision of a Britain that was not just holding on to the 219th most degraded country, particularly in England, 219th. Of 219 countries, we are the 29th most degraded for nature in England. And it would be great to see a vision that offered us what Britain could look like if nature was a high priority. So I believe absolutely centrally that nature should be, it would be great to see the NGOs working together. Of course, it's fantastic tonight to see Mark and Tim speaking with such passion, such shared common ground. So we know that they speak with the same voice. And Mark may want to come in on that.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of time. This is a really serious situation at the moment. We're in the middle or the beginning or whatever of a climate and ecological emergency. You know, this is as bad as it's ever been, and it's going to get much worse. So, you know, everybody does have to pool the resources. We do have to shout louder together. We do have to join forces on key issues. The only thing I would say is individual organizations have their own different campaigns. So where we can join up, we should. Where individual organizations have different campaigns, they need to join up with the organizations that share those same views. We do need to make an enormous amount of noise, much more noise than we are making currently.
Thanks.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. And thanks for a really good question there, Mike. I think it's got lots of really valuable replies. So we're going to go across to Steph now. So Steph, I'm just unmuting you, and please go ahead and ask your question. This is where we get to find out if Steph's mic is working. Are you there, Steph? It doesn't look like that. That sounds like that might not work. I'll leave you unmuted. If you manage to get your mic to work in the meantime, that's great. But Steph's question was, it's actually it's an advice question by the sounds of it. If you have a degree and some work experience, is there other ways to get work in wildlife crime prevention in the UK? I suspect that this is probably a question for Mark Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. There's always opportunities, and there's always the passion in people to try and seek those opportunities. So yes, if you can get your degree, most conservation jobs require degrees nowadays. That's just the reality of it. If you can get your degree and you can bring some experience with you, so if you volunteered for any of these organizations, there's lots of volunteer opportunities. I mean, since being about 7, I wanted to work in conservation. I wanted to work for the RSPB. I wanted to work in birds, complete a focus on that. And I set about, how do I do that? What do I have to do to work for the RSPB? I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to work for the RSPB. So basically I just followed a path completely single-mindedly to get to that position. And, you know, if you're determined and, you know, you're not going to take no for an answer, and you keep showing your face and you keep volunteering and you keep doing those things, you will win through. And, you know, in the position I'm in now, I want to give other people opportunities. To my team, 15 people, I've got the best possible team in the whole world. And I can see the same passion in me in lots of the people within the team, you know, the young people who really want to get on and do well. So, yeah. If you want to do that, send me an email after this talk. Send me an email, tell me about yourself, and I can try and help you in any way I can to guide you to where you want to be.
What a great question, and what an inspiring offer there, Mark. Thank you very much. So we're going to go across to Wendy now. Wendy, I'm just unmuting your mic, and ask away.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Yes.
Hi. Hello. Yeah, it's been really brilliant to listen to you all. Thank you. So yeah, I want to know, because I live in Stocksbridge, which is right beside Broomhead, one of the fairly awful places. And obviously locally, there are lots of people that are really pro-shooting. And the argument that I feel like I always come up against is always the argument of it brings so much employment and so much money to local people. I'm not, I don't have a degree in, I mean, I've got a degree in something else, but nothing to do with environmental issues or nature. So I feel kind of really underqualified and underinformed. And I just wondered if any of you have a kind of a way of arguing with people like that. Not arguing, but, you know, trying to get a point across.
I come in on that. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Ben?
I think so, Mark. Yeah. So let's go to Mark.
So how much of that money do you see, Wendy?
Well, none.
So there's the answer.
Yeah.
So there's the answer. How many people do see it? How many of the local population see it, as opposed to very small numbers of people that are involved? So a grouse moor is worth 25 to 30 million pounds. Most of them operate at a loss. These are you know, they're tools for individuals to flaunt certain aspects. And, you know, most of the nature on that moor is killed or removed, particularly things that that in any way stand in conflict with numbers of grouse. So this is a very small number of people that are taking over huge areas. This is why RSPB at the moment want to see licensing. So we basically want to see grouse moors licensed. So every moor has a license. If a wildlife crime occurs on that moor, the owner of that moor loses the license and loses the right to shoot. Having said all of that, the RSPB is currently reviewing its stance on shooting, and we're going to put something to the AGM in October, which you know, we'll update everybody in our latest position. So I think you've got to come back and say, what were national parks created for? Were they created for very few people, or were they created for actually the entire population? And what does the entire population want to see out of a national park?
That's great, Mark. I just wondered, sorry, before we go back to Wendy, Tim, you've obviously done quite a lot of campaigning, and sometimes in some quite hostile situations. It seems to me that I think Mark's answer, what I think are quite clear there, is sometimes it's about reframing the question. So I really like what you're saying there, asking that person how much of that money they see is really reframing it. I wondered, Tim, if there's other tactics that you've deployed as well.
Well, I think, I mean, ultimately that question goes fundamentally to what is the vision for the future for these uplands, and the way that land is currently managed. How can that land be managed in the future that still actually maintains employment and opportunities of people living in these communities? And what I would say, and speaking to many of the people about this and looking beyond the UK, is I think there are amazing opportunities looking to the future. The government at the minute is currently constructing what's called it's called the Environmental Land Management System. So new ways of actually funding land managers, and the whole issue around it is providing public goods and public services. So if we begin to rethink, you know, we look at uplands not just purely as grouse farms to maximize numbers of grouse so few people can shoot them. If we look at uplands as opportunities where we can restore landscapes and we pay people to actually restore landscapes, then that gets us into a very different situation. People who feel their livelihoods are being threatened, farmers who feel their livelihoods are being threatened. That isn't the case, because I think it's a question of looking in a very different way at the problem and how we solve those problems. You know, farmers can become carbon farmers. We need more woodlands. We need more trees in our uplands. We have a climate crisis, as Mark is saying. We need to carry on restoring our peatlands and carry on some of the amazing work that Moors of the Future are doing. And we need to look at different ways of generating income for these communities. If you look, for example, at remote communities in mid-Wales, look at that place in the Narada Valley where the farmer has now been attracting red kites, and people come to photograph red kites in an incredibly remote area of mid-Wales. What a fantastic way to actually think about the future. If we had pine martens back in our uplands, if you look in Scotland, we have hides for pine martens that people actually queue up to go into those hides to watch pine martens and photograph them and pay money for that. There are amazing nature tourism opportunities if we think about a nature-based economy in our uplands, but that requires a reframing of the current situation we're in and actually getting people to think differently and look for those new opportunities. And I think there's a very exciting future moving forward.
Yes, I endorse everything that both of you said. I mean, the other thing that, was it Wendy who asked the main question, what can she say? Well, the first thing to say is that this is our country. This is our land. We live in it, we occupy it, but actually you and I and 55 million of us own, on average, 7/100ths of an acre, whereas 27 royal dukes own 4 million acres. So land is massively slewed in the favour of a tiny minority. I just gave the statistic of sheep farming in Derbyshire in the UK. Sheep farming in the entire country, the entire islands of the UK, produces less money than the rural economy receives from tourism in Derbyshire and the Peak District. And that money could be and should be spread more widely across the national parks, because certain honeypot sites are being affected by high volumes of people. We have lost, in the last century, 100,000 kilometres of footpaths. Those uplands are our national heritage. If lockdown has taught us anything, it is the central place of nature as the safety valve for the human spirit. So we are released by landscape, and if those landscapes are, as Tim describes, full of well, I would like to see them full of bearded vultures, but full of buzzards and peregrines and goshawks, as Mark points out they could be, and full of pine martins. Why aren't there reintroduction programs for pine martins even now? Get rid of some of these grey squirrels. But, you know, the landscape could become a much more vibrant place. Tourism isn't just about rubbernecking. It's a real spiritual process by which we are recreated as human beings. To be in these places is hugely uplifting. So I think there is a very powerful argument for somebody like Wendy, and it is about the future. It is about seeing this country as ours, and not just, as is the case with grouse moor shooting across 1.5 million acres, satisfying the needs of roughly 15,500 super wealthy, often London-based people. So I would say that there are strong arguments, and hopefully the three of us have given you some ideas that you could take to your people arguing about the economics of grouse shooting.
That's a really good question. You really spared a lot of great comments there. So thank you very much, Wendy, and thanks to the panel. So we're going to go to Andy next. But before we do, we've got one or two people who've asked questions anonymously. But we also, you know, times are ticking on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think, perhaps what I'm going to do is put one each to each of you for these before we go to Andy. So we've got a question here that's directed at Mark. Probably Mark Thomas. So Mark, this one's for you. Mark, do you think the decline in goshawks and peregrines in the areas that you've identified is solely due to persecution, or could other environmental factors contribute?
Yeah, it is solely due to persecution, because these are the nests, the very nests that we've tried to protect. We've put cameras on, you know, we've guarded the nests. As the fewer number of nests are there, and they go down and go down and down, the persecution is having a big impact. You've only got to step away from the grouse moors and look at those nests on the neighbouring land that are not on grouse moors, and those nests are fine. So the average productivity of birds like goshawks and peregrines in areas away from grouse moors massively increases in comparison to on grouse moors. The only slight difference along the northeast peak moors that we talked about, some of the forestry has been removed, but it's a small amount of forestry, and the bits that are left should still have goshawks. There should be 7, 8, 9, 10 pairs of goshawks in those areas. So yeah, it's absolutely down to illegal persecution.
Brilliant, thanks, and a good question. And then the other anonymous question, we'll come to it before we go to Andy. Probably a question for Tim, this one, is what habitats would you expect to see in the Peak District without human intervention / grazing? And that's quite an interesting one, actually, because you know, because it's so human intervened already. What do we do? So what would it look like? Well,
look, I think that's a really good question, and I think we need to have that debate and that discussion, and that's something we're trying to do at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust and within the Wildlife Trust about what does a wilder future look like, as Mark has already alluded to. And I think we're keen to have that discussion and debate. What I think it looks like, and it doesn't mean humans not being in that landscape, it doesn't mean not having any grazing, not at all, because grazing animals, natural grazing animals, have always been part of this landscape. What I think it means is that we actually will see more trees in the landscape, we'll see more trees moving up the hillsides. We need to see more scrub, more brambles, more messiness. We have this obsession with tidying up kind of areas, and our sort of even people in their gardens, landowners may view scrubby areas, bramble areas as not being of any value. They are incredibly valuable for all kinds of wildlife, and by losing all this messiness, the bramble, the scrub, the hawthorn, we have been losing a huge amount of wildlife. So I see more of that coming back into the landscape. We need to carry on actually making sure that we restore more of our wetlands in those areas up in the high moorland. The Moors for the Future are doing, an organisation that's working in the Peak National Park, are doing a great job, but we need to do a lot more. So I think the future is looking really exciting if we think in this way. And just one final area I think we need to see more of is what the Welsh call frith. Maybe, Mark, you've heard of this expression. It's that transition zone between woodlands and uplands, and it's incredibly productive and so important for nature. And actually in the Peak District National Park, you very rarely see that habitat. I think that's kind of the way we need to move, but I think we need that discussion. I can see grazing animals at lower levels still being involved in the landscape. Absolutely no question about that. And I can see gamekeepers being turned into wildlife guardians and actually taking people out on wildlife safaris. If you look at the Masai Mara, in Africa, in the Serengeti, where they were involved and implicated in the killing of lions, and they've actually moved to actually recognizing that ecotourism and actually not killing lions, but protecting lions and showing people lions is the way forward. Why can't we have gamekeepers turned into people who would show people the amazing wildlife around the Peak District as it came back? At the minute, those gamekeepers are fully aware where all this wildlife is getting persecuted. I think we have to think imaginatively and creatively, and I think there are some really exciting solutions to these problems in unexpected ways, and I think that is exciting looking forward.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that answer, Tim. So what we're going to do is we're going to go now to Andy. So Andy, you've posted 3 questions in the chat, which is great, but I'll get you to choose your favourite one so that we can make sure we've got enough time for Ian and Kit. So Andy, please ask your question.
I think the first one's been answered really with the UK national parks. You know, we don't know what the new government's going to do. One thing that I've come across in my crusade on social media is how difficult it is as an individual breaking into some of these organisations that you work for or part of. I can understand obviously rules on social media, but there's many tweets that I've sent out that are never retweeted or reciprocated. And there was a vet who follows me from Glasgow University who actually, I asked her a question: why are some of these groups appear to be exclusive instead of being inclusive? And part of the problem, I think, even as somebody who has worked as a second job in conservation when I was in the Air Force, I do find some of the people that we actually are going to be meeting at Hen Harrier Day, a lot of them seem to be quite cliquey as a group, and it's very difficult to break in to that. And I think that is a weakness of that number of groups, in the sense that they need to be more open and take more ideas from other people, not necessarily from myself, to move things forward and to be to have a wider engagement. And on that strength, Mark from the RSPB, I have mentioned in the past about the fantastic volunteer training centre they've got down in Rutland Water. And that's a great way of engaging with a local community to get volunteers working for Rutland Water and Leicestershire Wildlife Trust. And I once mentioned that idea, possibly, let's say, Loch Leven up in Kinross. That could have been developed, but I'm not sure where the financial side would come from that.
And Andy, while it's obvious that you're very, very passionate, and I'm really enjoying it, what I'd like to do is, if you've got a question that you want to ask that the panel can answer in the webinar, but do feel free to contact us about everything else that you're raising here, because I think you're right about the sector could do more about being more open. However, I think now is a question for us to take forward. Okay, right. We'll go back to UK National Parks. We've known for a long time that the category seems to be a special category. What's been done from a national level regarding lots of the NGOs to actually try and improve the standard and quality of, obviously, what we've been talking about regarding wildlife and things? Is it a question of lobbying the right people in Parliament, you know, like Zach Goldsmith or his brother Ben, to actually change some of the thinking regarding the national parks that we accept and what we obviously have issues? Yeah, great question. So what do we, so I think probably for, again, another one, I don't feel left out here, Mark Hocker, or maybe you do have an answer to this, but what are the organisations, what are we doing to try and improve the wildlife situation in national parks, and what more could we be doing, I think is valid as well. Let's go to Mark, then Tim, and then Mark, and Mark Hocker, if you've got something to add to that at the end, it'd be interesting as well. I think it's quite a big question.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Hello, Andy. It's sort of nice to hear your voice. I see your name online, but not your voice. So the first thing to say, I think, is there was a big review of national parks by Glover, and that review was published last year. And in it, it basically said national parks have to do more and they have to do it better. And some of the cornerstone findings of that, it's going to be very interesting to see how they are implemented by each individual national park going ahead. So that is that work, in effect, the work you're talking about has been done. It's been reviewed, and now it's a case of the national park doing something to live up to the expectations of that review. I mentioned before about birds of prey and this bird of prey initiative in the Peak District National Park. It is not fit for purpose. That's the RSPB's view, and that is why we pulled out of that initiative. I noticed in your question, just sidelining very slightly, you mentioned raptor groups and how inclusive or whatever. I was speaking to the raptor group in the Peak yesterday, and they are crying out for more people to help. And we're currently speaking at the moment, lots of the conservation organisations in the Peak are speaking together, and we're perhaps going to announce something in the future about this where we can get more people involved. So that's the answer to my little bit of that.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah.
Tim?
Yeah, Andy, hi. Yeah, I've seen you. I think I do reply to some of your tweets.
No, you do. Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to name this vulture. You know.
Yeah. But when you get a lot of tweets and
no, it's okay.
Some not so nice, but you know, that's
I know.
Got to get through. Just quickly on the issue of volunteers, the Wildlife Trust. I mean, Ben knows this as well. I work very closely with Ben. We are absolutely committed to increasing the number of volunteers who work with us. We already have hundreds of volunteers who do amazing work with us. We have, for example, the Badger Vaccination Project. We're the leading wildlife trust running a big project to ensure badgers are vaccinated, not shot. And we have hundreds of people who volunteer on that vaccination project. So absolutely we can do more, but just to let you know, we are committed to getting more volunteers involved. And we are having discussions about how we can be even more inclusive than we are at the minute. And we do recognize we can do better in that area. On the issue of national parks, I think there's a mixture of approaches. There's a national approach, as Mark has said, with the Glover review. I met Glover with my CEO and colleagues, and we were talking to him about wilder national parks. He totally got that idea. So I think the idea of rewilding and making lots of our landscapes wilder is gradually gaining hold. I saw that Zach Goldsmith only recently has come out saying he's very much in favour of trying to increase the amount of land for rewilding. How far that goes politically with his government, I don't know, but it's good to hear now that actually within the government they're recognising the power and the benefits of natural solutions to our climate crisis and our ecological crisis. It also, I think, involves increasing public awareness and pressure right to your MP, right to the CEO of the Peak District National Park. It's your national park, Andy. It's my national, it's everybody's national park. Millions of people visit the national park, and I think collectively, as those voices increase, that is one key way that I think we will see the changes coming, because at the end of the day, if those people and more people want to see the changes, they are voters. And what politicians like to do is attract more voters.
Thank you very much, Andy. So we're nearly out of time. We've got two more questions, and I've also got one that I want to ask, actually. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to wrap up with a reading from Mark that I hope is going to leave us feeling very inspired about birds of prey. So we've got to be very time efficient here. So what I'm going to ask, we've got Ian and Kit. You're both waiting. Please put your question to one person, to one panelist. Panelist that is chosen. Let's keep it short so we can get Ian's question, we've got Kit's question, and actually I've got something really interesting that's being asked in the chat by somebody called Rachel that I want to pose at the end. So let's try and do that. So Ian, I'm going to bring you in now. Well, I say that. Don't press anything, Ian. Oh, there we go. I think I've got you. Let's hear from you, Ian.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. That's worked.
I'll ask Tim then. Thoughts on certain groups, some of them even call themselves conservation groups, mentioning no names, for spreading what they think is good news. For example, a 1,500% increase in breeding hen harriers in northern England, bringing a massive total of 12, when there should be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But it's just, if the general public see that type of thing, they think it's good when they don't know the other side. You know, what people's thoughts on those type of groups? Because I know, you know.
So is your question there, I think, Ian, what do we think about this group? So maybe what can we do to counter that kind of message? Is that? Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian. So Tim, on that one, if you can.
Maybe Mark, you might want to come in as well with the wider picture on hen harriers. I think that I think we just have to keep basically telling the truth as we see it, and that's what we're doing. There has been and will continue to be a strong counter-reaction from certain sections of the shooting community who don't like what we're saying, and that's fine. We are a democracy. People can raise different opinions, and That's all good. But I think our job is to actually, as Mark has done tonight, and hopefully as I've done tonight, is really point out the ongoing situation and the ongoing issues. And I think that as it becomes clear to people and more people are aware of what's going on, I think then actually then the counter arguments really become more and more difficult to put across.
Just two very quick points from me. The first point is, if these groups overstep the mark, then legal action towards them is an option. And then the second point against these groups is it shows where the balance or where the direction is going here. You know, the fact that some of these groups are having to form to counter the truth shows that we are in a winning position and this is going in one direction.
I think that's a really good point, Mark. And some of the people have been making that same observation in the chat, that if we're getting the kind of attention that we're getting now, and people are getting to the point even of personal criticism and becoming quite volatile, it's unpleasant, but it does show that we've got their danders up, and that's not a bad thing.
The only point I would say, I mean, this a colleague of mine has said, when groups start playing the man and not the issue, it shows they're actually on a losing streak, and I think that's where we're at the moment. So
very good observation on that. Okay, let's go to Kit for our last live question, and then we're going to finish up with one more question that I've just read through from Rachel. So Kit, we should be able to hear you now.
Great, thanks. So my question is to whoever wants to answer it, really, but if somebody's done some fundraising or wants to make a donation to a body or a cause that's protecting raptors, where I used the phrase "bang for the buck" in my question there, which I realise is an unfortunate phrase now. But I just wonder where is money well spent at the moment when we're not talking millions, just a few thousand or a few hundred or whatever people can give. Where would be a good source at the moment or a good place to donate?
I could give you a break.
Like we're going to be a bit biased here.
Yeah, I could give you a very unbiased view.
Mark Cocker, do you want to give some thoughts to this one?
Well, I do. I mean, one of the interesting things is I saw Andy's question, which was very important. One of the key movements that's happening is, alongside the pre-existing Big Three, the National Trust, the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust, there are a lot of small groups that are taking action by themselves. Truthfully, the person that has changed this agenda by themselves, a single person, if we had to name them, it would be Mark Avery. And he's not a wealthy man, and he is targeted, and he has absorbed so much abuse. Mark is a big character in all sorts of ways. He can take it. But one of the interesting things is individuals can change. And I think that's a lesson to Andy and to Kit, that individuals can make a difference. And if I was going to give my money and I was a multimillionaire, because I'm also freelance, giving a small amount of money to a single individual such as Mark Avery be very powerful. He's not paying me. I'm not his agent, by the way. But I think bang for buck, Mark has done astonishing things. That's not to suggest that within the structures that they have to maintain, Ben, Tim and Mark aren't doing wonderful work also. That's not my point. But individuals can make a difference, I suppose, is my larger point.
Yeah, I think that's great, Mark. And I tell you, I think Mark and Tim, I think we won't come back on that, because I think it would be Mark's point. But
pleading.
Just one.
I should point out that right now there is a Hen Harrier Art Auction going on, and it's as you talk about Mark Avery, Mark. Currently, it's an anonymous art auction, and I'm bidding for a picture of a Hen Harrier against Mark Avery.
Don't pay him yet.
If you paid him, he could.
So we may end up. Mark may need that funding for the. It's not a very expensive piece of art. Anyway, sorry, go on, Mark.
Just to come back on that question, without it being a person or a body, a satellite tag. Funding a satellite tag for whoever fits that tag, that is a key game changer here, because if a bird isn't tagged, you don't know how it dies or where it dies. You tag a bird like a hen harrier and it tells you exactly when it dies, how it dies, where it dies.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Mark, and a really good point. So the last question we're going to take before we go across to Mark Cocker to close us with a reading. Is going to be from Rachel Everett. And Rachel, we don't have time to bring you in, but I think it's an interesting question. And what Rachel's asking is there scope for more direct action within legal bounds to try and stop activities to try and stop bird of prey persecution? And I think it probably worth pointing out actually that some of the direct action that organisations like Greenpeace do isn't legal, and that is part of their MO. But perhaps we'll go to well, I don't know who would like to. Who, either of you, any of you feel a burning desire to answer that? Because I think it's an interesting question.
Well,
I don't mind.
It's pretty obvious that there are many people who have self-formed groups in Sheffield and elsewhere that have had a big effect. I mean, they have crystallised. Raptor Persecution, run by Ruth Dingay, has around her a cluster of individuals who've taken action personally and made a massive difference. So I think, yes, you can. You can't stand between the shotgun and the grouse or the hen harrier, but you can definitely do things. I mean, it's a combination of the two, supporting the existing organisations, but also finding your way, such as Andy Patton, to these raptor groups and joining them and finding ways to take action in surveys, etc. So there are things that can be done.
So do you want to say something on that?
Yeah, sorry. One thing I would want to say in response to Rachel, hi Rachel, is I think, for example, regarding the bearded vulture, the issue of stink pits, I think if you're out on the moors and you see a stink pit, you see a big collection of dead animals, take a photo, post it on social media, explain where you were, and let's get that circulated, because I know for sure that the people who are laying the stink pits do not really want this out in the open. There's been a big response when I spoke about stink pits on Radio 4 on the PM program last week. But I think the more we get these issues out in the open, I know they're a bit gruesome and it's a bit upsetting, but this is happening in our national park. The more we get this out there, the more people will come under pressure who are, for example, laying these stink pits down, will come under pressure to stop it. It has to be stopped. It has no place in the national park. We should not see beautiful white mountain hares ending up in stink pits. They are an iconic mammal in the national park. It's an issue that's very close to my heart, but that's one example. If you're out there, do post images of things you see that you're not happy about and you think should be stopped.
Thanks, Tim.
What I would say from an RSPB point of view is if you come across any scene that involves birds and raptor persecution, do not interfere with it. Get on the phone, get us out there. We can get covert cameras installed and we can catch the people. The number of times we get calls where people have let birds of prey out of traps, which is fine, it's good meaning, but actually the opportunity to catch the gamekeeper on that estate, killing that bird or using the trap to catch it or whatever, has gone. And that could make a real game changer. All the things I gave away in the talk earlier, the instrumental changes in the picture have come through prosecutions.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody to the for some really, really good questions. So I'm going to hand back to Mark now. So over to you, Mark.
Okay, well, I was just going to finish with a very short reading. I mean, one of the interesting things about nature and nature conservation for anybody who's passionate is a meeting such as this seems to be full of angst and anxiety and concerns to shape the future, etc., which are essentially political, philosophical and cultural matters. But as I was talking to a person making a program about nature the other day, you know, most of the time I'm alone in these landscapes in a state of semi-exaltation because I absolutely love nature and it gives me enormous passion and sense of fulfillment. Most of the time I'm just in a kind of heaven. Yesterday I went to see broad-leaved helleborine for the first time in my life, and it's just magnificent. You know, just to encounter anything is fantastic. Anyway, this is just one small encounter that involves birds of prey and the kind of cultural impress that they have. This is what they do for us. So hopefully I've captured something of that. It's from a place in Norfolk where I have a home. I'm in heaven in recent days. Buckenham Marshes across the river is a mosaic of temporary splashes and mud-edged pools. And from the Yare's raised bank, I can see how it's smothered in late winter pre-migration waders and wildfowl. All the flocking thousands are triggers in turn for the presence of many harriers and peregrines, while the former circle continuously over the marsh, swinging and twisting in cold air. The peregrines are no more than sorry, are no more than ghosts spooking the others into wild, free-ranging chaos. However, I did have one extraordinary sighting on the evening of the new moon, a male and female peregrine spearing in tandem towards the southern horizon. Both closed their wings into a long stoop and they fell across the sky until I could see them only as two unequal sized drops of mercury pulled by gravity into an ellipse. Best of all are the churning masses that the peregrines leave in their wake, widgeon boiling up from the pools in fractal patterns, and the white lines across the male's wings flash and reflash in the grey waves of their panic. Thousands of lapwing are spread in smaller units across the marshes, but no matter how intense their own anxieties, lapwings can only ever look elegant. Lines of them slowly lilt and buckle in the sky, and when each bird comes back down quietly to land, its wings close over its white body like a black shutter. There was one remarkable moment I noticed when the stolid swans were utterly oblivious and head down, feeding, but overhead a great rush of starlings passed and brushed up into their midst, dunlins and ruffs, until all these birds were promiscuously globed together in one flock of fear. It's extraordinary stuff, and afterwards I head home with my brain full of it. I can sense all the exact sounds and sights sloshing out even as I rush down the beck, through the gate, up the glade, past the houses to the front door. By the time I click the computer and press the first keys, there's so little left of all that cold wind and wild bird blood, except perhaps just enough for one short prayer. Thank you. Right, well, I suppose that wraps up our evening. We've done our Q&A. Thank you everybody for attending. I hope you feel like me that's been incredibly educational. It's been offering us a vision for the future, and we've also heard from the public, and it's given us much food for thought and hopefully ideas to take out into other places, into your own actions elsewhere and in your own homes. So from us in the Peak District, a good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.